The house on Gaston Street smelled like formula and coffee and the faint residue of green paint from the nursery walls Marin had finished in September. It was 4 in the morning, January. Savannah in winter carried a damp cold that did not bite but pressed into the bones until you stopped pretending you could not feel it. And Marin Cole had stopped pretending somewhere around 2, when the girl woke up hungry and the boy followed minutes later. They had been synchronized like that since the first ultrasound showed 2 heartbeats where she had expected none. She sat at the kitchen table with her daughter against her chest, one hand on the bottle, the other curled around a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm during the 3rd feeding. Through the wall, Marcus was humming. Low, tuneless, the sound of a man who did not know any lullabies but figured if he kept the vibration steady, the baby would assume it was one. It was working. The boy had gone quiet. Marcus learned most things this way. He showed up, adjusted, kept going until the thing he was doing started to resemble the thing he was trying to do. The house was still settling around them, 5 months of belongings arranged into a space that was learning their rhythms. The kitchen counter held a drying rack, 2 bottles, a bag of coffee beans from the roaster on Broughton Street, and a framed photograph of Marin's mother holding both babies at the hospital, crying so hard she could not see the camera. Every surface had a burp cloth draped on it. The radiator ticked in the hallway. The furniture was second-hand except the crib, which Marcus had assembled on a Saturday afternoon using a YouTube tutorial and a vocabulary of quiet, inventive profanity that made Marin laugh so hard she had to leave the room. Less than a year ago, none of this existed. Less than a year ago, a doctor in an office on Abercorn Street had looked across a desk and told Marin that her body could not do the thing it had, apparently, done twice. Less than a year ago, the man she had planned to marry had sat on a porch with a packed bag and explained in the measured language of a man who had rehearsed the speech in his car first that he could not build a future on the word unlikely. Forever, it turned out, had conditions. And the fine print was written in a language Marin did not speak until the day he packed his bag. But the old life, the one with the ring and the rented house, and the man who said we'll figure this out, and meant it for exactly 14 days. That is where this starts. Marin Cole met Derek Calloway in the waiting area of a veterinary emergency clinic on a Thursday night in June, 5 years before everything fell apart. She was a year and a half into her job as a vet tech at Savannah Animal Hospital, pulling a double shift to cover for a colleague on maternity leave. Derek was standing at the reception desk holding a shoebox lined with a dish towel. Inside the shoebox was a sparrow with a broken wing that he had found on the sidewalk outside his building. Most people who brought wild birds to the emergency clinic were children or adults who had never considered that nature handled its own triage. Derek was neither. He said he knew the bird would probably die. He said so plainly without performance, without asking to be praised for the effort. But he also said he had not felt right leaving it on the concrete, and the shoebox was all he had. Marin took the sparrow. It died less than an hour later while Derek sat in the waiting room reading an outdated magazine. When she came out and told him, he nodded, thanked her for trying, and asked if she wanted to get coffee. It was nearly midnight. She said yes. He drove her to a Waffle House on Victory Drive because nothing else was open, and they sat in a booth under fluorescent lighting eating hash browns and talking about absolutely nothing important until 2 in the morning. She learned he was a civil engineer. He learned she collected vinyl records from estate sales. Neither of them mentioned the dead bird again. It was exactly the kind of first meeting that does not feel like the beginning of anything until much later, when everything it started is ending. 5 years followed. Most of them were good. Derek worked at a firm downtown. Steady money, respectable work. He kept his car clean and his shirts ironed and showed up to everything 10 minutes early. His father, Edwin Calloway, had been a circuit court judge in Chatham County, respected by everyone who practiced in his courtroom. He died of a heart attack at 57 on a Tuesday morning, gone before the paramedics reached the courthouse steps. Derek was 19. His mother, Patricia, had responded to the loss by pulling her remaining family closer with both hands, tightening her grip on Derek and his 2 younger sisters until the closeness became impossible to separate from control. Derek did not resist it. He did not recognize it. To him, Patricia was simply a mother who loved fiercely. Marin saw it differently but kept the observation somewhere quiet and did not revisit it often enough. He proposed on a Sunday afternoon in October at Forsyth Park. The fountain was running. Live oaks heavy with Spanish moss threw broken columns of light across the grass, and the whole park felt like a cathedral that no one had built on purpose. He had an emerald-cut diamond because Marin had mentioned once at a friend's engagement party that she did not care for round stones. He had remembered. That was Derek. He cataloged every preference, every offhand comment, every passing mention of taste, and filed it away for future use. What Maren did not understand yet was that remembering details and understanding a person were different skills, and Derek had mastered only one of them. They rented a house on East Broad Street. White clapboard, narrow porch, a kitchen with a gas stove that only worked on 3 of its 4 burners. Maren planted rosemary and basil in the window boxes. Derek hung shelves, fixed the screen door, caulked the bathtub, and looked proud of himself when he stood back to admire what his hands had done. They argued about dishes in the sink and whether his mother needed to call every single evening and whether the neighbor's rooster, which had no legal right to exist inside city limits, warranted a formal complaint or was simply part of living in Savannah. They were happy. They had the kind of arguments that couples have when the foundation is solid and the stakes are small, and neither of them noticed how easy it all was. They would notice later. People always do, when easy stops being something they can afford. The conversation about a baby started 6 months into the engagement. Derek brought it up first. He wanted to be a young father, and the urgency was specific to him, rooted in a loss that had shaped every large decision he made since he was 19 years old. His father died at 57. Derek was 31. The arithmetic lived in his head like a clock he could not stop checking. He wanted decades with his children, not just years. He wanted to coach their teams and attend their graduations and be alive, fully and completely alive, for all of it. The alternative, the possibility of running out of time, was a fear he carried so deep he had stopped recognizing it as fear and simply called it planning. Patricia reinforced the urgency. She wanted grandchildren while she was still young enough to enjoy them, which was her way of saying she wanted them now. Every dinner, every holiday phone call, every visit to the house on East Broad carried the same undercurrent. "You too aren't getting any younger." She delivered it with a warm smile, making the demand sound like an observation. Pressure so polished you could almost miss the push behind it. Maren wanted children too. She always had. Growing up in Vidalia with her mother Colleen, just the 2 of them in a house small enough to hear each other breathe, she had imagined a fuller table. More voices, more noise, more of the chaos that comes with a house full of people who belong to each other. She agreed to start trying before the wedding. At 29, the timing felt right. The relationship felt solid. The arithmetic seemed simple. They stopped using protection in September. By November, nothing had happened. By December, still nothing. Derek suggested they see a specialist, just to make sure everything's fine, he said. Just to be proactive. The word proactive was a word Derek used when he wanted to disguise worry as initiative. Maren agreed because she was worried too, though she kept her worry quieter than he kept his, which meant she kept it almost silent. Dr. Lana Okafor's office occupied the 2nd floor of a medical building on Abercorn Street, between a dermatologist and a pediatric dentist. The waiting room was painted sage green, a shade that was supposed to be calming, and instead reminded Maren of her work scrubs. Magazines fanned across a glass coffee table, every one of them months out of date. A white noise machine hummed on the receptionist's counter, filling the room with the sound of nothing, engineered emptiness meant to soothe. Maren thought it sounded like the noise an airplane makes right before turbulence. She did not share this observation. The tests took 2 appointments, blood panels for Maren, a semen analysis for Derek. The results needed a week and a half. And during that week and a half, Maren treated a terrier with a torn ligament, a tabby with early kidney disease, and an English bulldog who needed his skin folds cleaned and despised every second of the process. She came home each evening to a man who filled the house with reassurance so loud it left no room for honest conversation. Derek said, "I'm sure it's fine," so many times that the words stopped being words and became just a sound present and weightless, the verbal equivalent of the white noise machine in Dr. Okafor's lobby. On the 8th of January, a Wednesday, they sat across from Dr. Okafor at her desk. Pale wood, a single orchid in a ceramic pot at the corner. Dr. Okafor wore small gold earrings and her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she opened the folder in front of her with the measured calm of a woman who had learned to deliver devastating news without letting her voice shake, because the voice is what the patient holds on to when the words themselves are too heavy to carry. Maren's AMH levels were critically low. Her antral follicle count was well below the expected range for her age. The clinical term was diminished ovarian reserve, and what it meant, stripped of its medical language, was that Maren's body had fewer eggs than it should, and the ones remaining were not responding as they should, and the chance of conceiving naturally was, in Dr. Okafor's exact words, extremely unlikely. The white noise machine in the lobby hummed through the wall. The orchid sat in its pot. Maren looked at the orchid and thought absurdly that someone watered it every day for it to look like that, and someone in this office had that job. And what a strange thing it must be to tend a plant in a room where lives came apart at the seams. Derek reached for her hand. His grip was tight enough that she could feel the bones of his fingers pressing against hers, and she let him hold on because holding on was what he needed, and she had always been better at giving people what they needed than at asking for it herself. Dr. Okafor continued. There were options. IVF with Maren's own eggs, though the success rate would be lower than average. Donor eggs. Adoption. She laid each option on the desk between them with the careful method of someone dealing cards in a game no one had volunteered to play. We'll figure this out, Derek said. His jaw was set, his hand firm around hers. Maren watched his face while Dr. Okafor talked about referrals and success statistics and support resources, and she saw what she would spend the next 2 weeks trying to unsee, a shift behind his eyes, a recalculation. The quiet, rapid reassessment of a man running new numbers against an old blueprint and discovering that the blueprint no longer fit. They drove home in near silence. The radio played something Maren would never remember. Derek pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine running, hands at 10 and 2, staring through the windshield at the house they rented together, the porch with the screen door he had fixed, the window boxes with her herbs going brown in the January cold. "We'll figure this out," he said again, and the repetition was the tell. The first time a person says something reassuring, it is for you. The second time, it is for themselves. The first 3 days were close to normal. Derek hugged her longer than usual in the mornings. He brought home tulips from the market on Broughton Street, the orange ones, her favorite, still wrapped in brown paper and smelling like cold air and open water. He mentioned IVF twice, casually, as if it were no more complicated than choosing a different route to work. He was performing normalcy with the full commitment of a man who believed the performance could become real if he held it long enough. By the end of the first week, the performance started to crack. On Thursday night, he took a phone call in the garage. Maren heard his voice through the door, muffled the rhythm of a conversation that was not casual, but the words themselves swallowed by plywood and insulation. When he came back inside, she asked who called. "His mother," he said. "Just checking in." He looked at the counter when he said it instead of at her. The following weekend, they were supposed to visit the venue they had been debating for the reception, a restored barn off White Marsh Island with string lights and a wraparound deck and a view of the marsh that turned gold at sunset. Derek canceled Saturday morning. He said he had a project review to prepare for. Nothing urgent, just wanted to get ahead. Maren did not argue. She could feel the shape of what was happening before the words for it arrived, a pressure drop between them. The air in the house thinning out, growing harder to breathe with each passing day. He started sleeping on the couch. The first night he said he had fallen asleep watching a movie. The second night he said his back was bothering him. By the third night he offered no reason at all. The couch was his now. The bed was hers. And somewhere in that hallway between them the word home was quietly being replaced by the word house, though neither of them said so out loud. Maren went to work every morning. She held down a Labrador for a blood draw and assisted with a spay on a rescue shepherd, and cleaned the kennels and updated patient charts and answered the phone and did what needed doing with the same steady competence she had brought to the job since her first year. On her lunch breaks, she sat in her car in the clinic parking lot and ate a sandwich and watched the rain collect on the windshield and thought about the word unlikely, how clinical it sounded, how careful, how much it resembled a door being closed by someone too polite to slam it. She told no one what was happening. Not her co-workers, not her mother in Vidalia, not Sienna, her closest friend since college. For 2 weeks she carried it alone. The diagnosis, the distance, the growing certainty that Derek was solving a problem he had not told her he was solving. She carried it steadily, with her shoulders straight and her face composed and the weight distributed so carefully that no one looking at her would have guessed she was holding anything at all. 14 days. That was how long the retreat lasted. 2 weeks of Derek pulling away in increments so small that a less attentive woman might have missed them entirely. Maren did not miss them. 5 years of studying this man had taught her his rhythms, his tells, how his voice flattened when he was processing an emotion he did not want to feel, how his shoulders drew up half an inch when he was about to make a decision he knew she would not like. 5 years of listening to a man is enough to hear every shift in his interior architecture, and Maren could hear the foundation giving way. On a Wednesday evening in late January, she drove home from the clinic in the dark. Savannah in January lost its light early, and the street lamps on East Broad were the old kind, the ones that threw circles of orange on the sidewalk and left everything between them in shadow. She parked in the usual spot next to the azalea bush that had not bloomed in 2 years but that she refused to pull out. Derek was sitting on the porch steps. His overnight bag was beside him. Brown leather, the one Patricia had given him for his 30th birthday. The one he took on weekend trips to project sites in Jacksonville, and the one he had packed for their anniversary in Charleston when they stayed at the inn on King Street and ate fried shrimp until they could not move. It was zipped and upright and leaning against the railing, and it looked, sitting there on the painted wood in the orange glow of the streetlight, like a sentence that had already been finished. He looked up when she got out of the car. His eyes were red, but his face was arranged, composed. The face of a man who had been sitting in the cold long enough to rehearse every word of what he was about to say, and had arrived at a version he believed he could get through without breaking. "I've been thinking," he said. Maren stood on the walkway with her keys in one hand, and her work bag over her shoulder and the January air pressing against her face. She looked at the bag, at him, at the porch light above his head with the dead moth trapped inside the frosted glass that she had been meaning to clean for weeks and now never would. She had known for 14 days. Maybe longer. Maybe since Dr. O'Kafer's office. Since that half-second shift in his eyes, the recalculation, the moment when Derek Calloway heard the word unlikely and began solving for an exit instead of a way through. Every time he had said, "We'll figure this out," the emphasis had been on the wrong word. He had not been figuring it out. He had been figuring his way out. And here he was, finally on the porch, with his bag packed and his speech prepared, catching up to the decision Maren had watched him make 2 weeks ago in a doctor's office while he held her hand and pretended he was holding on. She set her work bag on the ground. "Okay," she said. "Say what you need to say." He said he loved her. He started with that as though love were a disclaimer that could soften everything coming after it. He said he had been thinking for 2 weeks and he hated himself for what he was about to say, and he wanted her to know that this was not about blame. Then he used the word fair, then the word honest, then the phrase "owe it to both of us," which was the phrase men used when they had already decided to do the unfair thing and needed the language of honor to dress it up. He said he had always imagined his life a certain way, that a family was the centerpiece of that vision, not a nice addition to it, but the foundation, the thing everything else was built around. He said the diagnosis had not changed how he felt about her. He said it had changed what he could see ahead of them, and he could not pretend otherwise. Because pretending would be worse than this. "I can't ask you to watch me grieve something I haven't lost yet," he said. "And I can't promise that I won't. I know myself, Maren. I'll resent it. I'll try not to, but I will. And you don't deserve that." He sat on the porch steps and she stood on the walkway, and between them was 6 feet of January air and 5 years of shared meals and shared silences, and a ring she was still wearing and a bag he had already packed. Derek cried while he talked. His voice cracked twice, and both times he paused, gathered himself, and continued as if stopping would mean he could not start again. Maren listened. She did not interrupt. She did not argue. The strange thing was that she had imagined this moment dozens of times over the past 2 weeks, rehearsed her own response, assembled arguments and counterarguments and quiet devastations she could deploy to make him understand what he was throwing away. And now that it was here, now that the words were landing on the porch boards between them, she felt none of the things she had practiced. She felt emptied. A room someone had walked out of and left the lights on in. When he finished, he stood. He picked up the leather bag. He walked past her on the walkway, close enough that she could smell his deodorant, the cedar one she had bought him for Christmas. He stopped at the trunk of his car and turned around. "I still love you," he said. "I need you to know that." The cruelest thing Derek Calloway ever said to Maren Cole was, "I still love you," and he said it while loading his suitcase into the trunk of his car. Because love that leaves is not love. It is a memory of love, dressed in its clothes, walking around in its body, saying the right words with the wrong ending. Love that leaves is just leaving with better manners. She did not say anything back. He closed the trunk, got in the car. The headlights swept across the porch as he reversed out of the driveway. And then the street was empty, and the engine sound faded, and the only noise left was the buzzing of the streetlight and the neighbor's dog who had started barking again, confused by the headlights at this hour. Maren sat down on the porch steps. The spot where he had been sitting was still warm. She stayed there until the streetlights cycled off at dawn. The cold pressed into her legs through her scrub pants and into her back through her jacket, and she let it, because the cold was real, and it was here, and it was not going anywhere. And there was a blunt comfort in that. in something that stayed. She went inside when the sky turned gray. She made coffee. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking at the herb boxes she had planted, the rosemary going woody and the basil long dead from frost. The ring was still on her finger. She took it off and set it on the windowsill next to the dead basil, and it sat there, diamond catching the early light, looking expensive and useless and very, very small. The next 3 days passed in a fog that Maren moved through on muscle memory. She went to work. She came home to an empty house that no longer smelled like Derek's cedar deodorant or the coffee he brewed too strong or anything at all except cold air and the faint residue of what used to be a shared life. She ate cereal standing at the counter. She slept on her side of the bed out of habit, then moved to the middle, then could not sleep at all, and sat on the couch Derek had claimed for 2 weeks and watched television with the volume low and her brain turned off. On the 4th day, she called Sienna Maddox. Sienna was her closest friend, had been since their freshman year at the University of Georgia, when they were assigned neighboring dorm rooms and bonded over a shared hatred of the communal bathroom and a shared love of cheap wine. Sienna sold real estate now, was good at it, had opinions about everything, and the energy to enforce them. He left, Maren said. 2 words, flat and factual. Sienna was at the apartment within 40 minutes, which meant she had driven from downtown in rush hour traffic at a speed that probably violated several municipal ordinances. She brought wine and tissues and a righteous fury that vibrated off her in waves. She called Derek things Maren had not yet allowed herself to think. She paced the kitchen, opening cabinets, looking for snacks, talking without pausing for air. "You will get through this," Sienna said. "You are the strongest person I know, and he is going to regret this for the rest of his miserable life." Maren appreciated the energy. She did not yet have the capacity to match it. The practical reality settled in within a week. The house on East Broad rented for $1,800 a month, and Maren's salary at the animal hospital did not stretch that far alone. Derek had offered, through a text message that read like it had been drafted by a lawyer, to cover 2 months of rent to give you time. 2 months. A courtesy with an expiration date. She could stay in the house that smelled like their old life and wait for the money to run out, or she could go somewhere smaller and start the process of learning what her life looked like with only her own name on the lease. Sienna found the apartment, of course she did. It was above a flower shop on Bull Street, a single-room studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom so narrow you could wash your hands while sitting on the toilet. The floors were old pine, creaky in the corners, warped near the window. The whole place smelled like peonies drifting up from the coolers below, sweet and dense and alive, and when Maren walked in for the first time, she stood in the center of the room and breathed it in and felt something loosen behind her ribs that had been clenched for weeks. Not relief, not happiness, just a fraction less pressure. A room that did not know who Derek Calloway was. A room that had never heard the word unlikely. They moved her things on a Saturday. Sienna's SUV made 3 trips. Maren brought her clothes, her vinyl collection, her grandmother's cast-iron skillet, and a framed photo of her mother that she hung on the wall above the bed with a nail she hammered in herself. They ate pad thai on the floor that night because there was no table yet, and Sienna talked about the real estate market and a man she was seeing who texted too much, and the evening was almost normal, almost light, and Maren was grateful for it in a way she could not say without crying, so she did not say it. February arrived cold and gray. Maren worked. She adopted a routine that was less a life and more a scaffolding to keep the days upright. Alarm at 5:30, coffee from the roaster on Broughton Clinic by 7, lunch in her car. Home by 6, dinner for 1, vinyl on the turntable, bed, repeat. The structure was not healing, it was maintenance. A way of moving through time until time started to feel like something other than punishment. The word arrived on a Thursday in the middle of February. Jess Fan, one of the vet techs at the clinic, caught Maren in the break room during lunch. Jess was careful about it, which made it worse, because Jess was never careful about anything. She was the kind of person who said exactly what she thought the moment she thought it, and the fact that she was hesitating meant the thing she was about to say was going to hurt. "My wife Grace was at the Garden Society luncheon on Tuesday," Jess said. Derek's mom was there. Maren waited. "She was talking about you, about the breakup, about why Derek left." Maren waited. "She used a word, Maren. Grace told me, and I almost didn't tell you, but I think you need to know. Defective." Patricia Calloway, at a luncheon attended by 40 women in a room with white tablecloths and flower arrangements and finger sandwiches cut into triangles, had told her table that Derek had left Maren because she was defective. She had said it with sympathy in her voice, which was the worst part, because the sympathy made it sound medical, clinical, like Maren was a product that had failed a quality inspection and been returned to the shelf. Defective. Grace Beaumont had told her sister, who had told Jess Fan's wife at a book club meeting, who had told Jess in their kitchen that night over dishes, and now Jess was telling Maren in a break room that smelled like microwave soup and bleach, defective. One word at a luncheon, and Patricia had reduced 29 years of a woman's life to a single blood test. Maren thanked Jess. Her voice was level. Her face was composed. She finished her shift. She clocked out at 5:15. She walked to her car in the parking lot, sat behind the wheel, closed the door, and pulled her jacket off and balled it up and pressed it against her face and screamed. She screamed into the cotton lining until her throat burned and her chest ached and her breath came in ragged, shallow pulls that sounded like someone drowning on dry land. She screamed for the diagnosis and for Derek and for the porch and for the word defective and for the fact that a woman she had tried to impress for 5 years, a woman whose approval she had chased across dinner tables and holiday gatherings and Sunday brunches, had distilled the entire sum of Maren Cole into a single clinical adjective and served it up between cucumber sandwiches. It was not a dignified moment. There was nothing composed or graceful or quietly strong about it. It was ugly and raw, and it lasted a long time. And when it was finished, Maren sat in the driver's seat with mascara on her jacket and snot on her chin and her hands shaking on the steering wheel, and she did not feel better. She felt emptied again, but this time the emptiness was different. It had an edge to it, a heat, the beginnings of something that would take a while to name, but that sat in her stomach like a coal that would not go out. If this story has found you, if you are still listening, stay close. What came next is the part that changed everything. 2 weeks after Patricia's luncheon, Maren sat on the floor of her studio apartment with Sienna, a bottle of red wine open between them, no glasses because Maren had not yet bought any, drinking straight from the bottle and passing it back and forth. Sienna was talking about a property she had listed in Ardsley Park, a 3-bedroom with original hardwood and a kitchen that needed gutting. And the conversation was comfortable and ordinary, and Maren was almost relaxed for the first time in weeks. Then Sienna said Derek seems happier, at least since he started spending time with that Page girl. The room went still. Maren looked at Sienna. Sienna's face changed as the words caught up with her mouth, a flicker of recognition that she had said something she was not supposed to say, followed by the rapid, visible calculation of someone trying to figure out how to walk it back. "Who is Page?" Maren said. It was not a question. The flatness of her voice made that clear. Sienna set the wine bottle down. "She's nobody. She's just someone he's been seeing casually. I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't think it was serious." "How long have you known?" The pause before Sienna answered was the answer itself. "A few weeks." "How many weeks?" 3, maybe. I heard from Carla Dodd, who ran into them at a restaurant on River Street. 3 weeks. Derek had left Maren on a Wednesday in late January. If Sienna had known for 3 weeks, she had known almost from the beginning. She had known while she was bringing wine to the apartment and listening to Maren talk about the grief and sitting on the floor eating pad thai and saying all the right things about strength and regret and futures that were better than the past. "You knew for 3 weeks, Maren said. "And you sat here with me and listened to me talk about whether he might come back, and you already knew he was taking someone else to dinner. I was trying to protect you. You were barely sleeping. You were barely eating. I didn't think piling more on would help." Maren stood up from the floor. Her legs were stiff. Her voice was steady, which was worse than if she had been shouting, because steadiness in that moment took everything she had, and Sienna could see it. "You decided what I could handle," Maren said. "That's not friendship, Sienna. That's management." Sienna left 20 minutes later. The bottle of wine sat half empty on the floor. Maren poured what was left down the kitchen drain and stood at the sink and stared at the wall and added Sienna to the list of people who had chosen what they thought she needed instead of asking what she wanted. 3 days later at 2 in the morning, Maren drove to Derek's house. She did not plan it. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the flower shop cooler cycle on and off below her. And then she was putting on shoes and picking up her keys and getting into her car and driving east on Victory Drive with the windows down because the cold air felt like the only thing keeping her in her body. She parked on the street across from the house on East Broad. The porch light was on, the same one with the dead moths she never cleaned. The herb boxes were empty now. Someone had pulled out the dead plants and not replaced them. A light was on in the bedroom, their bedroom. Maren's side of the bed faced the window, and she could see the glow of the bedside lamp, warm and amber, the exact light she had fallen asleep to for 3 years. She sat in the car for 45 minutes. Her hands were on the wheel, the engine was off. She watched the house and felt everything at once, the love and the loss and the anger and the humiliation and the desperate, irrational hope that he would walk out the front door and see her and say he had made a mistake and come home to her, even though she no longer lived there and he was no longer hers and the home they had shared existed only in the past tense. A shadow moved behind the bedroom curtain. One shape, maybe two, she could not tell. She did not want to know. She started the car and drove back to Bull Street and climbed the stairs to her apartment and sat at the edge of her bed and pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed until the breathing felt voluntary again. It was 3:15 in the morning. She had work at 7. She set her alarm, turned off the light, and lay in the dark listening to the cooler and the creaking floorboards and the distant sound of a train moving through the rail yard south of downtown. She did not sleep. The following Saturday, the animal hospital participated in a pet adoption event at Savannah Arts Academy, the public high school on Washington Avenue. Marin volunteered because Dr. Emery, the clinic's owner, asked her to, and because saying yes to things was easier than deciding whether she had the energy for them. She loaded a crate of kittens into the clinic van, 6 tabbies from a litter surrendered the week before, all healthy, all vaccinated, all small enough to fit in one hand. The gymnasium was set up with folding tables and hand-painted signs and a banner that read, "Find your forever friend," in letters that were enthusiastic if not perfectly straight. Teachers and students milled around with clipboards. Marin carried the crate to the table assigned to her and began setting up the pen and the water dishes and the small fleece blankets the kittens liked to burrow under. A man in a rumpled blue button-down was wrestling with a folding table at the station next to hers. The table was winning. One leg refused to lock into place, and every time he set it upright, it folded back in on itself with a metallic snap that sounded like laughter. He tried 3 times, failed 3 times, and on the 3rd attempt, looked up and caught Marin watching. He laughed. At himself, at the table, at the situation. The laugh was open and unguarded, and it did not ask for anything. He was tall, brown-skinned, with close-cropped hair and glasses that sat slightly crooked on his face. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms, and there was a pencil tucked behind his ear that he seemed to have forgotten about. "I teach music, not engineering," he said. In case that wasn't obvious. "Try the latch on the inside of the leg," Marin said. "Push it in before you flip it." He tried. It worked. He looked at the table with something close to wonder, as though it had performed a magic trick. "Marcus Webb," he said, extending his hand. "Band director. Now apparently also a man who can operate a folding table." Marin shook his hand. His grip was warm and easy, and he did not hold on too long or too loosely, and he smiled at her with the comfortable confidence of a person who had nothing to prove and no interest in pretending otherwise. "Marin Cole," she said. "Vet tech? I brought the kittens." He looked at the crate. A tabby had its paw extended through the wire door, reaching for nothing in particular, and Marcus crouched down and let the kitten bat at his finger, and his whole face softened. "I've been thinking about getting a cat," he said. "Then today's your lucky day," Marin said. And for the first time in weeks, standing in a high school gymnasium with a crate of kittens and a stranger who could not operate a folding table, she was thinking about something other than the word unlikely. Marcus Webb adopted a one-eyed tabby from the litter that Saturday afternoon. The cat was the runt, gray with faint stripes and one good eye, the left, the right one lost to an infection before the litter was even surrendered. None of the families at the adoption event had wanted her. Children reached for the 2-eyed kittens first. Marcus reached for this one. He held her against his chest and she settled immediately, as if she had been waiting for exactly this person. And he looked at Marin over the top of the cat's head and said, "Her name is Dizzy, after Dizzy Gillespie," he explained when Marin asked. "Greatest trumpet player who ever lived, also famously cross-eyed." Close enough. He filled out the adoption paperwork in the gymnasium, paid the fee, and left with Dizzy in a cardboard carrier with holes poked in the sides. Marin assumed that would be the end of it. A nice man, a brief exchange, a warm 10 minutes in the middle of an otherwise difficult month. She was wrong. 2 days later, Marcus texted her a photograph of Dizzy asleep inside an open trumpet case, her one good eye closed, her paw draped over the velvet lining like she owned the thing. Below the photo, a single line, "She has claimed my trumpet. I may never play again." Marin laughed. Alone in her studio apartment, sitting on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand and the flower shop cooler humming beneath her, she laughed. It was a small sound, but she had not made it in weeks, and the surprise of it, the physical relief of her face doing something other than holding still, was enough to make her text back. "She's asserting dominance. Respect the hierarchy." He sent more photos over the following days. Dizzy on the kitchen counter, staring at a running faucet with the intensity of a scientist observing a phenomenon. Dizzy wedged behind the couch cushion, invisible except for one gray paw sticking out. Dizzy sitting on a stack of sheet music, rumpling Coltrane. The photos arrived without pressure. They did not demand a response, did not carry subtext, did not come with any obligation beyond the simple invitation to look at a one-eyed cat doing something absurd. Marin responded to all of them. After a week, the texts expanded beyond Dizzy. Marcus mentioned a school concert he was preparing for, the spring showcase, featuring a jazz ensemble made up of juniors who could barely keep time but played with an enthusiasm that compensated for everything. He asked Marin what kind of music she listened to. She told him about the vinyl collection. He sent back a voice memo of himself playing a few bars of Chet Baker's Almost Blue on his trumpet, then apologizing for the quality because he was recording it on his phone in his kitchen. It was the saddest, warmest piece of music Marin had heard in months. She played it 4 times and saved it. They met for coffee on a Wednesday after work, at a place on Habersham Street that Marcus described as having the best espresso south of Broughton and the worst croissants in the entire city. Both claims proved accurate. He was easy to be around. He asked questions and listened to the answers and did not fill silence with noise when silence was what the moment needed. He did not bring up Derek. He did not ask why Marin seemed sad sometimes, or careful, or hesitant. He did not try to fix the parts of her that were visibly cracked. He just sat across from her and drank his coffee and talked about his students and his cat, and the trumpet he had played since he was 12 years old. And somewhere in that conversation, without either of them naming it, a door opened. Not wide, just enough to let some light through. He was divorced, he told her later. 2 years ago. His ex-wife Rachel lived in Atlanta now. They had been married for 3 years and it had ended quietly, without drama, which he said was somehow harder than a fight would have been. When it's ugly, at least you know it's over, he said. When it's just quiet. You spend a long time wondering if you should have been louder. Marin understood that perfectly. She did not say so. She nodded, and he saw the nod, and that was enough. In the first week of March, her mother called. Colleen Cole did not call often. She was 57 years old, worked the front counter at the Vidalia post office, and communicated primarily through brief text messages that read like telegrams. Saw the doctor, fine, call if you want, or your cousin Robbie got arrested again, DUI, Lord. Phone calls meant something had weight behind it. Come home this weekend, Colleen said. Her voice was steady, but there was an undertone to it, a frequency Marin had heard only a handful of times in her life. The last of which was when her grandfather died, and Colleen had called to say Daddy's gone, and then been silent for so long Marin thought the line had dropped. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Marin drove to Vidalia on Saturday morning, 2 hours south on I-16, then off onto the smaller roads where the pines pressed close to the asphalt and the light changed from Savannah's coastal white to the deeper, filtered green of inland Georgia. She knew the drive by heart. Every curve, every gas station, every stretch where the signal dropped. She had made this drive hundreds of times, first from college, then from Savannah, always returning to the same small house with the yellow curtains and the cast-iron mailbox her grandfather had welded decades ago. Colleen was in the kitchen when Marin arrived. Coffee was already made. It was too strong because Colleen's coffee was always too strong, brewed in a percolator that was older than Marin and produced a substance closer to engine degreaser than beverage. Colleen poured 2 cups without asking, set one in front of Marin at the kitchen table, and sat down across from her with the practiced economy of movement that defined everything Colleen Cole did. No wasted gestures, no preamble. I know about the diagnosis, Colleen said. Sienna told me. And before you get angry at her, she was right to call. You should have told me yourself. Marin opened her mouth to respond, but Colleen raised one hand, palm flat, a gesture that had been silencing the Cole family for 3 generations. That's not why I asked you to come. She wrapped both hands around her mug. The kitchen was quiet. The yellow curtains moved in a draft from the window that had never sealed properly. A cardinal sat on the feeder outside, pecking at seeds. I need to tell you about what happened before you were born. Colleen had tried to get pregnant for the first time at 23. She and Marin's father, David, who had left when Marin was 4 and lived somewhere in Florida now, and was not relevant to this story or to most stories, had been married a year. The pregnancy lasted 9 weeks before Colleen woke up in the middle of the night in a bed soaked with blood and drove herself to the hospital because David was working the night shift at the paper mill and there was nobody else to call. The doctor told her these things happened, that it did not mean anything was wrong, that she should try again. She tried again at 25. That pregnancy lasted 11 weeks. Same ending, different hospital room, same sterile fluorescent lights, and same stiff sheets and same feeling of her body doing something her mind could not control. At 27, she tried one more time. She made it to 14 weeks, long enough to start showing. Long enough that the women at the post office had begun asking about names and nursery colors. She lost that one on a Sunday afternoon, alone in the bathroom of this kitchen, this exact kitchen, while the radio played gospel music from the counter and the coffee percolator ticked on the stove. After the third loss, her doctor told her that her chances of carrying a pregnancy to term were, in his words, very poor. Colleen remembered his exact phrasing because she wrote it down that night in a notebook she still kept in the drawer of her nightstand table. Very poor, 2 words that were supposed to close the door. They told me I couldn't, Colleen said. Her voice was level. Marin's was not. I did. You're the proof. There was a clinic in Macon, Colleen continued. Fertility treatments. IVF. It was expensive and it was new, and David did not want to do it, which was one of many things David did not want to do that Colleen did anyway. She drove to Macon twice a week for 3 months. Injections, blood draws, monitoring, waiting. One embryo took, one, and that one became Marin. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel like a project, Colleen said. I didn't want you walking around thinking you were some kind of miracle baby or a science experiment. I wanted you to feel normal, ordinary, like any other kid. She paused. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I should have told you years ago. But I didn't, and now I'm telling you because you need to hear it from someone who was in that chair before you were. Marin sat at her mother's kitchen table with her hands around a cup of coffee that was too strong and tears running down her face and her chest so tight she could barely breathe. Colleen reached across the table and put one hand over Marin's wrist. She did not say it'll be okay or everything happens for a reason or any of the empty phrases that people hand you when they do not know what else to offer. She just held Marin's wrist firm and warm, and the two of them sat there in the kitchen with the yellow curtains and the cardinal on the feeder, and the coffee getting cold. And for a long time neither of them said a word. Marin drove back to Savannah on Sunday afternoon carrying something she had not had when she arrived. She could not name it precisely. It was not hope. Hope felt too fragile, too easily punctured. It was closer to stubbornness, a refusal inherited from her mother to accept a verdict delivered by a single voice in a single room on a single afternoon. She made an appointment with a different fertility specialist. Dr. Ruth Chen practiced out of an office on Drayton Street, smaller than Dr. Okafor's, no white noise machine, no orchid. The walls were covered in framed diplomas and, oddly, a signed photograph of a blues singer Marin did not recognize. Dr. Chen was in her 60s, compact, direct. She reviewed the records Marin had transferred from Dr. Okafor's office, ran new blood work, performed a fresh ultrasound, and sat Marin down in her office 2 weeks later with the results. Your AMH is low, Dr. Chen said. That's consistent with Dr. Okafor's findings, and it's real, but low is not 0. Your antral follicle count today is higher than it was in January. Hormonal fluctuation is normal. Stress affects these numbers. Life circumstances affect these numbers. She leaned back in her chair. Dr. Okafor's diagnosis was accurate for the day she took the sample. But a single blood draw is a photograph, not a film. It captures one moment. It does not predict every moment that follows. She took off her glasses and cleaned them on the hem of her lab coat, a gesture that seemed more habitual than necessary. Natural conception is unlikely. I won't argue that. But extremely unlikely and impossible are different words for a reason. Bodies surprise us, Marin. That's not hope talking. That's 30 years of medicine. Marin left Dr. Chen's office without a plan, without a timeline, without the certainty that Derek had always needed and that she had finally stopped expecting. She left with something less defined and more durable. A second data point. An acknowledgement that the story her body was telling might not be finished yet. March turned into April. The peonies below Marin's apartment bloomed and the cooler ran harder, and the studio smelled so sweet some mornings that it was almost overwhelming. She went to work, came home, played records, texted Marcus, and slowly, carefully allowed her world to expand by one person. Marcus brought her a vinyl copy of Chet Baker's Chet Baker Sings that he found at a secondhand shop on Bull Street. He left it on her doorstep with a sticky note that read, Track 4. Trust me, Track 4 was I Fall in Love Too Easily, and Marin played it 3 times that evening and did not analyze why he had chosen that particular song, and also could not stop thinking about why he had chosen that particular song. They cooked dinner together at his apartment for the first time in mid-April. He made spaghetti, which he overcooked, and garlic bread, which he burned. They ate it anyway, sitting at his kitchen table while Dizzy wound between their ankles and the windows were open and the spring air smelled like jasmine and cut grass. Marcus told her about growing up in Augusta, about his mother who taught middle school math, about his father who drove a FedEx route and listened to jazz in the cab and was the reason Marcus picked up a trumpet at 12 and never put it down. Marin told him about Vidalia, about Colleen, about the quiet, two-person household where love was expressed through actions and almost never through words. She told him about the diagnosis. She told him about Derek. She told him about the porch and the packed bag and the word unlikely and the other word defective that she still carried like a splinter beneath the skin. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet and the candle on the table had burned down to a stub and Dizzy was asleep on the radiator. That word, Marcus said. Defective. That's not a word you use for a person you've spent time knowing. He did not say anything else about it. He did not call Derek names or promise that Patricia would regret it or offer the kind of righteous anger that other people deployed because they thought anger was what you were supposed to give someone who had been hurt. He just named the cruelty for what it was, plainly and calmly, and then he poured more wine and changed the subject, and the evening continued, and when Marin drove home that night, she realized that somewhere between the overcooked spaghetti and the burned garlic bread, she had begun to trust him. Quietly. Incrementally. The way broken things heal when you stop poking at them and let them be still. Spring settled into Savannah with its usual extravagance, azaleas detonating in every yard, live oaks so heavy with new growth they seemed to droop under the weight of their own abundance. Marin and Marcus saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. He came to the clinic to visit Dizzy's siblings who had not yet been adopted. She went to his spring concert and sat in the auditorium and watched his students stumble through a jazz set that was technically imperfect and emotionally honest, and Marcus stood in front of them conducting with such complete, unself-conscious joy that she had to look away for a moment because the feeling in her chest was bigger than she had room for. In late April, she began to feel different. The nausea came first. She noticed it on a Monday morning. A faint queasiness that she attributed to the shrimp po' boy she had eaten the night before from a food truck on River Street, that she should have known better than to trust. It persisted through Tuesday. By Wednesday, she was drinking ginger ale at the clinic between appointments and wondering if she had picked up a stomach bug. By Thursday, the nausea had been joined by a fatigue so heavy it felt like someone had filled her pockets with sand. On Friday morning, standing in the bathroom of her apartment with the peonies drifting up through the floorboards and the early light coming through the window, she looked at herself in the mirror and thought the thought she had been refusing to think all week. She drove to the drugstore on her lunch break and bought a pregnancy test. She bought it almost as a joke, or at least that was what she told herself. Because the alternative was that she was buying it seriously, and if she was buying it seriously, then she was acknowledging a possibility that she had been told did not exist. She put the box in her purse and finished her shift and drove home and sat on the edge of her bathtub and stared at the box for 10 minutes before opening it. 2 lines, she sat on the edge of the tub for a very long time. The cooler hummed below her. The peonies pressed their scent through the floor. Her hands were shaking, not violently, just a fine tremor that she could feel in her fingertips and in the muscles of her forearms, a vibration that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her hands. She bought a second test, different brand, same result. She called Dr. Chen's office and got an appointment for the following Monday. The weekend between Friday and Monday was the longest weekend of Marin Cole's life. She did not tell Marcus. She did not tell Colleen. She did not tell anyone. She went to work on Saturday morning and held a trembling dachshund for a nail trim and smiled at the dog's owner and said, "She's doing great." And the ordinariness of her own voice astonished her, because inside she was a woman standing on a fault line waiting to see which direction the ground would shift. On Monday morning, she sat in Dr. Chen's examination room and watched the ultrasound screen. Dr. Chen moved the wand slowly, methodically. The image on the screen was gray and grainy and looked, to Marin, like weather patterns on a radar map. Abstract shapes moving in a static sea. Dr. Chen went still. Her hand stopped. She leaned forward, adjusted something, and the image shifted. "Well," Dr. Chen said. Her voice was professional, but the corners of her mouth had turned upward in a way that was impossible to disguise. She turned the screen so Marin could see it clearly. "Do you see that? 2 flickers, 2 distinct rhythmic pulses on the screen, side by side, like 2 tiny hearts keeping time with each other. Twins, Dr. Chen said. If you are still with this story, what happened next is the part that will stay with you. Hold on. Marin sat in her car, in the parking lot of Dr. Chen's office on Drayton Street. The engine was off. Her hands were on the steering wheel, the same position they had been in the last time she sat in a parking lot in this condition. The night she screamed into her jacket. But the silence now was different. It was not the silence of something breaking. It was the silence of something beginning that was too large to fit inside any word she knew. 2 heartbeats. 2. In a body that had been called unlikely, in a woman who had been called defective, in a life that was supposed to be closed to this exact possibility. 2. She had to tell Marcus. She had to tell Colleen. And she had to decide. Sitting in that car with the spring sun warm on the windshield and Savannah blooming green and reckless in every direction, whether to tell the man who had left her, because her body could not do this thing that her body had done. Twice. At the same time. She sat in the car and breathed and did not start the engine and let the silence hold her. She told Marcus first. She drove to his apartment after leaving the clinic parking lot, without calling ahead, without rehearsing what she would say, because every version she tried in her head sounded like a speech. And this was not a moment for speeches. This was a moment for sitting across from someone and saying the true thing and seeing what happened next. He opened the door with Dizzy perched on his shoulder, the cat's one good eye blinking slowly at the afternoon light. His smile arrived before his words did, easy and warm. And then he saw Marin's face, and the smile adjusted itself into something more attentive, more careful. "Hey," he said. "What's going on?" She came inside. She sat on his couch. Dizzy hopped down from Marcus's shoulder and settled into the cushion beside her, purring immediately, as though proximity to Marin was enough to warrant celebration. Marcus sat across from her in the armchair he used for grading papers, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on her face. "I'm pregnant," Marin said. The silence that followed was long enough for Marin to count 3 full cycles of Dizzy's purr. Marcus did not move. His expression shifted through several stages in rapid succession, shock first, then confusion, then a brief flash of something she could not read, and finally a settling, a landing, as though his thoughts had been thrown into the air and had come back down in an arrangement he could work with. "Okay," he said. "Then, how are you feeling? Terrified?" He nodded. "That makes sense. There's more." She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. "It's twins." Marcus leaned back in the armchair. He took a long breath, the kind that fills the lungs completely and empties them slowly. And Marin watched his chest rise and fall and waited for the thing she feared, the recalculation, the shift behind the eyes, the same sequence she had watched play out across Derek's face in Dr. Okafor's office 4 months ago. It did not come.
"What do you need?" Marcus said. 3 words.
He did not ask whose children they were, because the math was straightforward and Marcus could do math. He did not ask about Derek. He did not ask what this meant for them, or whether she had a plan, or what the future looked like. He asked what she needed in that moment. Today. Right now. The simplest, most essential question a person can ask another person, and he asked it without hesitation and without attaching any conditions to the answer. "I don't know yet," she said. "I don't know anything yet." "That's fine," Marcus said. "We'll figure it out." The phrase landed in the room and Marin flinched. She did not mean to. It was involuntary, a physical response to a sequence of words that had been permanently damaged in her memory, and Marcus saw the flinch and understood it instantly. "I didn't mean it the way he meant it," Marcus said quietly. "I meant we'll actually figure it out together, whatever that looks like." Marin looked at him. This man she had known for 2 months, this band director with an overcooked spaghetti habit and a one-eyed cat and a laugh that asked for nothing, and she felt the tight, guarded thing behind her sternum crack open half an inch. She did not cry. She wanted to, but she did not. She reached across the space between them and put her hand on his knee, and he covered it with his, and Dizzy purred between them, and for a few minutes the apartment was very quiet and very still, and it was enough. The news traveled the way news travels in a city like Savannah, which is to say quickly and with embellishments. Marin told Colleen first on the phone that evening. Her mother was silent for so long that Marin checked to see if the call had dropped. Then Colleen said 2, and Marin said 2, and Colleen made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob, a sound Marin had never heard her mother make, and said, "I'm coming up next weekend." "Make sure you have groceries," she told Sienna next, because despite everything, despite the 3 weeks of hidden knowledge and the fight and the silence that had stretched between them since, Sienna was still the person Marin instinctively reached for when the ground shifted. She sent a text, brief, factual, no embellishment. I'm pregnant. Twins, call me when you can. Sienna called within 4 minutes, crying so hard she could barely speak. Within a week, the news had made its way through the network of mutual acquaintances that connected Marin's life to Derek's. Jess at the clinic told her wife Grace, who told someone at book club, who told someone at the Garden Society, who told Patricia Calloway. And Patricia told Derek, because of course she did. Derek called on a Thursday evening. Marin saw his name on her phone screen and let it ring 5 times before answering. She was sitting in her apartment with a cup of tea and a record playing Billie Holiday, the one Marcus had brought her the week before. She picked up the phone and said nothing. She waited for him to speak first. "I heard," Derek said. His voice was careful and controlled and very, very quiet, the voice he used at his most guarded when every word was being weighed before release. Marin remembered that voice. She had heard it on the porch the night he left, and before that in the car after the diagnosis, and before that on a handful of occasions across 5 years when Derek was feeling something too large for his usual composure to contain. Marin, he stopped, started again. "I made a mistake." She let the silence sit. She did not fill it for him. She had spent 5 years filling silences for Derek Calloway, smoothing his discomfort, finishing his sentences, meeting him halfway when he could not find the words. She was done meeting halfway. If he had something to say, he could walk the full distance. "Can we meet?" he said. "I need to talk to you. In person, please," she agreed. She did not agree because she owed him anything. She agreed because she had spent 4 months carrying the weight of his departure, and she wanted to set it down in front of him and let him see what it looked like up close. They met at the cafe on Congress Street where they had gone on their first date, which was either Derek's idea of symbolism or his limited imagination, and Marin could not tell which. The cafe had not changed: exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a menu written in chalk that was always slightly smudged. They sat at a table by the window. The same window they had sat beside 6 years earlier when they were strangers becoming something more. Now they were something more, becoming strangers. Derek looked thinner. His face was drawn in a way that had nothing to do with dieting and everything to do with sleeplessness. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair was longer than he usually kept it. He looked, Marin thought, like a man who had removed a load-bearing wall from his own house and was only now noticing the cracks in the ceiling. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "That would be new," Marin said. She did not say it with venom. She said it simply as a factual observation, and the simplicity of it landed harder than cruelty would have. Derek absorbed it. He nodded. Fair. He told her what she already knew, that he had been scared, that the diagnosis had triggered a panic that connected directly to his father's death, to the fear of running out of time, to the blueprint he had been carrying since he was 19 that told him exactly what his life was supposed to look like. A wife, children, a big family dinner table, all of it humming with the noise and chaos of a legacy that would outlast his heartbeat. When the diagnosis threatened that blueprint, he could not adapt. He could not sit in the uncertainty. He could not hold the maybe and keep loving her at the same time. "My mother was in my ear," he said. "I know that's not an excuse. I'm not offering it as one. She was saying things and I was listening because listening to her was easier than sitting with the fear." "What was she saying?" Marin asked, though she knew she wanted him to say it himself. Derek looked at the table. That I deserved someone who could give me what I wanted. That there were other options. That I was young enough to start over. "She called me defective," Marin said. Derek's eyes came up. What?" "At a Garden Society luncheon. She told a table full of women that you left me because I was defective. That word traveled through 4 people and reached me in a break room at work." His face went pale. She watched the information land, watched him process it, watched the flinch. "I didn't know she said that," he said. "Marin, I swear I didn't." "I know you didn't. Your mother doesn't need your permission to be cruel. She's perfectly capable on her own." The silence between them was heavy and specific. The barista called someone's name. The espresso machine hissed outside the window. A couple walked past holding hands, and Marin watched them for a moment and felt nothing about it, which surprised her, because 3 months ago the sight of a couple holding hands would have split her open like a log under an axe. "I want another chance," Derek said. His voice broke slightly on the word chance. "I know I don't deserve one. I know what I did, but I'm asking." Marin looked at him across the table. She looked at the man she had loved for 5 years, the man who had brought her tulips and proposed at Forsyth Park, and remembered she did not like round diamonds and slept on the couch for 2 weeks because he could not look at her and say the thing he was already deciding to do. She looked at his face and she searched for the pull, the old gravity, the part of her that had always leaned toward him, and she found it. It was still there, Quieter now, smaller, but there, and beside it, something harder, something forged in the 4 months since the porch. A knowledge that had settled into her bones while she was busy surviving. You didn't leave because of a diagnosis, Derek. You left because you needed a guarantee, and love doesn't come with one. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. You had options, she continued. IVF, donor eggs, adoption. Dr. Okafor laid them all out. You heard them? You held my hand while she talked, and then you went home and you slept on the couch and you called your mother and you packed a bag. You chose the exit, you chose the easy answer, and the easy answer was leaving me. It wasn't easy, I know, but you did it anyway. The cafe hummed around them. Derek pressed his palms flat against the table, and Maren noticed that his hands were shaking. And she felt something for him that was not love and not anger and not pity, but was close to all three without landing on any of them. Compassion, maybe? The kind you feel for someone who broke something they cannot fix and knows it and has to sit with that knowledge for the rest of their life. I need time, she said. I need to figure out what I want, and I need you to understand that whatever I decide, it's mine. You gave up the right to be part of that conversation the night you put your bag on the porch? He nodded. He did not argue. She stood up. She left money on the table for her coffee, though she had not touched it. She walked out of the cafe onto Congress Street, and the May sunshine hit her face, and the city hummed around her, and she did not look back. 2 weeks later, Maren ran into Patricia Calloway at the Publix on Abercorn Street. She was in the produce section, picking out avocados, pressing each one gently with her thumb to check for ripeness, when she heard a voice behind her that she recognized before she turned around. The voice was pitched in the specific register of southern warmth that Patricia deployed when she was in public and being observed, honeyed and careful and completely calibrated. Maren, my goodness, how are you, sweetheart? Maren turned. Patricia was standing by the tomatoes, her cart half full, her hair done, her jewelry matching her blouse, every detail in place. Her smile was wide and warm and it reached her eyes, which was the most impressive part, because Maren knew the warmth was manufactured, and Patricia's commitment to the manufacturing was genuinely remarkable. I heard the wonderful news, Patricia continued. I'm so happy for you. I always cared about you, you know that. Maren set down the avocado she was holding. She took a breath. She felt the coal in her stomach, the one that had been there since February, the one that had never gone out, and she let it warm her from the inside. You called me defective, Patricia. The smile faltered. A hairline fracture. At the Garden Society luncheon in February. You told your table that Derek left me because I was defective. Grace Beaumont told her sister Angela, who told Jess Fan's wife at book club, who told Jess at the clinic, who told me in a break room that smelled like soup. Maren's voice was steady and calm, and she did not raise it above the volume you would use to discuss the weather. So please do not stand in the vegetable aisle and pretend you cared. Patricia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her composure, the armor she had worn for 62 years, cracked along a seam that was probably older than Maren, and beneath it was something that looked, briefly, like shame. Or maybe just the shock of being named to her face, which was something that evidently did not happen often enough. Maren picked up her avocado, put it in her basket, and walked to the next aisle. She did not wait for a response. Patricia did not follow. At the checkout, Maren's hands were steady. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. And she thought about her mother, Colleen, who had driven herself to the hospital at 23 while bleeding, and who had sat in a kitchen in Vidalia and told her daughter the truth with a voice that did not waver. And she thought, this is what it looks like. Strength that does not announce itself. Strength that simply stands and says the true thing and does not flinch when the true thing makes someone uncomfortable. If this story has held you this far, the end is close. What Maren decided next is the part that matters most. Sienna came to the apartment the following week. She arrived without wine, without tissues, without the arsenal of emotional supplies she usually deployed. She sat on the edge of Maren's bed because the apartment still had no couch, and she put her hands in her lap and looked at Maren and said, I need to say something to you, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Maren leaned against the kitchen counter and crossed her arms and waited. I was wrong, Sienna said, about Derek and Paige, about keeping it from you. I told myself I was protecting you, but that's a lie I was telling to make myself feel better about a choice that was not mine to make. You are not fragile, Maren. You have never been fragile. You are the strongest person I know, and I treated you like you were made of glass, and that was insulting, and I'm sorry. She did not cry. She did not offer caveats or qualifications or a single sentence that started with "but." She sat on the bed and delivered the apology like a package she had carried a long way and was finally putting down. "Okay," Marin said. "Okay, you forgive me, or okay, you heard me both. But it's different now, Sienna, between us. It has to be." "I know. Don't decide what I can handle. Ask me. Even when you think the answer will hurt, ask me. I would rather know the truth and cry about it than be comfortable inside a lie." Sienna nodded. Her eyes were bright, but she held it together. She had learned something in the weeks of silence. Marin could see it, a new understanding of where her help ended and Marin's autonomy began. It was not a comfortable lesson. It had left marks. But Sienna was sitting there anyway, on the edge of a bed in a studio apartment above a flower shop, offering the truest thing she had. "Can I hug you?" Sienna said. "Or is that too much right now?" Marin uncrossed her arms. "Get over here." It was not the friendship they'd had before. It was something with clearer edges, more honest borders. It was better. Later that evening, Marin sat alone in her apartment. The turntable was playing Nina Simone. "Feeling Good," the version where Nina's voice sounds like it is coming from the bottom of a well and the top of a mountain at the same time. The peonies had faded for the season, replaced by the lighter scent of gardenias from the shop's summer inventory. The light was long and golden and the apartment was warm, and Marin had her hand resting on her stomach, not yet showing but not flat either. The earliest, most private evidence of what was happening inside her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "I know you said you needed time, I respect that. But I need to ask you one more time, is there a chance for us?" Marin read the message twice. She set the phone on the bed. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the porch, the packed bag, the 14 days of silence. The word defective, the recalculation in his eyes in Dr. Okafor's office, the tulips he brought home while he was already leaving, all of it. Then she thought about Marcus humming through a wall at 4 in the morning, about a man who asked, "What do you need?" before he asked anything else, about a one-eyed cat named after a jazz legend, about overcooked spaghetti and a sticky note that said, "Track 4, trust me." She picked up the phone and typed her response, slowly, choosing each word with the same care she used to choose paint colors and vinyl records and the people she allowed to stay in her life. She sent it and set the phone face down on the bed and turned up the Nina Simone and closed her eyes and listened to the music fill the room. The text she sent Derek that evening said, "You can be sorry, I believe that you are. But I can't build a life with someone who leaves when the building gets hard. I hope you find what you're looking for, Derek. I already have." She did not hear from him again for a long time. What she heard, through the same network of acquaintances that had carried every other piece of news through Savannah's social bloodstream, was that Derek and Paige Dunmore had ended things. The timing suggested it was connected to Marin's pregnancy, though the details were unclear and Marin did not seek them out. Paige had been a kindergarten teacher who wanted a big family with a reliable man. And somewhere in the weeks following the news of Marin's twins, the reliable man she thought she had found turned out to be something less solid than advertised. Marin felt an unexpected pull of sympathy for Paige, a woman she had never met and would probably never meet, who had been drawn into the aftermath of choices that were never hers, collateral damage in someone else's collapse. Marin knew what it felt like to be the person standing in the blast radius of a man's decisions, and she would not wish that on anyone, not even the woman who had briefly replaced her. Derek moved back in with Patricia. Marin learned this from Jess at the clinic, who learned it from Grace, who learned it from the Garden Society grapevine that never stopped producing. The house on East Broad was put up for rent. The listing appeared on Sienna's agency's website, and Sienna called Marin to ask if she wanted it taken down so she would not have to see it, and Marin said no, leave it. It was just a house, and she meant it. The house had been a container for a life that no longer existed, and containers without contents are just rooms with locks on the door. June arrived and the pregnancy began to show. The studio apartment above the flower shop, which had always been small, started to feel genuinely inadequate. Marin stood in the bathroom one morning and calculated how she was going to fit a crib, let alone two, into a space that was already crowded with her vinyl collection and a second-hand bookshelf and a kitchen table that doubled as a desk. Marcus came over that evening and sat on the bed and looked at the room with the appraising eye of a man who had spent his career figuring out how to fit 23 students and their instruments into a practice room designed for 12. "We need a bigger place," he said. This was not a proposal, it was an observation. But the word "we" sat in the room like an offering, quiet and deliberate, and Marin heard it. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said. They found a house on Gaston Street in July. Sienna found it, because Sienna found everything, and the discovery of the listing was accompanied by a 3-paragraph text message detailing the square footage, the proximity to the hospital, and the quality of the natural light in the kitchen, followed by, "You're welcome, I checked before sending." See? I'm learning. The house was a rental, a narrow Savannah row house, with a deep front porch, and a yard just big enough for a dog they did not yet have, and a kitchen with 2 windows and enough counter space for 2 people to cook without colliding. It had a second bedroom, which would be the nursery, and original hardwood floors that creaked in the hallway and were silent in the bedrooms, which struck Marin as a house that understood the difference between the spaces where noise belonged and the spaces where it did not. They moved in August. Marcus brought his furniture and his trumpet and his books, and Dizzy, who explored every room of the new house with her one good eye, and then chose the nursery as her personal territory, sleeping in the empty crib, as though staking a claim before the rightful occupants arrived. Marin brought everything she had, which fit into the back of Sienna's SUV with room to spare, and she carried the framed photograph of her mother through the front door first because it felt right, because the photograph had been the first thing hung in the apartment on Bull Street, and it would be the first thing placed in this new house too. She painted the nursery on a weekend in September. Marcus helped with the taping and the drop cloths and then stood back, because Marin wanted to do the walls herself. She chose a color that took her 3 trips to the hardware store to find, a green that was not sage and not mint and not emerald, but something between all of them, warm and quiet, and she did not realize until she had finished the second wall and stepped back and looked at it that she had chosen the exact shade of her mother's kitchen curtains in Vidalia, the ones that moved in the draft from the window that never sealed properly. The ones she had been staring at when Colleen told her about the miscarriages and the IVF and the daughter who was supposed to be impossible. She did not tell Marcus why the color mattered. She just stood there with green paint on her forearms and her eyes stinging, and Marcus, who understood silence better than most people understood conversation, put his hand on the back of her neck and stood beside her and said nothing at all. The months moved, July to August to September to October and into November, and with each passing week Marin's body did the thing she had been told it could not do, steadily and without apology. She went to her appointments with Dr. Chen. The twins grew. Their heartbeats were strong and synchronized, 2 tiny percussionists keeping time with each other in the dark. Marcus came to every appointment. He asked Dr. Chen questions from a list he wrote out in advance on index cards, and Dr. Chen answered them with the patience of a woman who appreciated a thorough student. Marin kept working at the clinic until her 8th month, when Dr. Emery told her to go home and rest, and Marin protested, and Dr. Emery said, "Marin, you are carrying 2 human beings. The Dachshunds can wait," she conceded. The last animal she treated before her leave was a gray tabby with an ear infection, and she held the cat steady while the vet tech who had taken over her station administered the drops, and the cat blinked at her with a look so profoundly unbothered by the circumstances of its life that Marin laughed and thought of Dizzy, and went home feeling lighter than she had in months. Colleen came up from Vidalia in early November and did not leave. She installed herself in the guest room, which was technically Marcus's music room, and Marcus moved his trumpet and his sheet music to the corner of the living room without complaint, and the house on Gaston Street suddenly contained 3 adults, a one-eyed cat, and 2 babies who had not yet arrived but whose presence was already rearranging everything. Colleen cooked, she cleaned, she organized the nursery with the efficient precision of a woman who had spent 30 years sorting mail, and saw no reason why baby supplies should be any harder to categorize than parcels. She did not hover. She did not offer unsolicited advice about childbirth or parenting or the choices Marin was making. She simply showed up every morning, made coffee that was too strong, and did whatever needed doing. Love in the Cole family had always looked like action. It still did. The twins came on a Monday morning in late November, 3 weeks early, which Dr. Chen said was normal for twins and which felt like nothing remotely close to normal to anyone in the delivery room. The labor was long, 18 hours from the first contraction to the last. Marin spent most of it gripping Marcus's hand and breathing through clenched teeth and thinking at various points that she could not do this, that she was not built for this, that her body had lied to her about its capabilities in both directions, first by saying it could not carry children and now by implying that delivering them would be survivable. Marcus stayed. He held her hand through every hour. He did not flinch when she squeezed hard enough to leave marks on his fingers. He did not leave the room, not once, not even to eat. At one point, somewhere around hour 12, Marin looked at him and said, "If you say we'll figure it out, I will break your other hand." And he laughed, and the laugh was the best sound she had heard all day, and she made it through the next contraction on the strength of it. The girl came first. 5 pounds, 4 ounces, screaming the instant she hit air, a sound so enormous and furious and alive that every person in the room stopped what they were doing and just listened. The boy came 11 minutes later, quieter, 5 pounds even, blinking at the lights with an expression of confused curiosity, as though he had not quite consented to this change of venue. Marcus held the boy first while Maren held the girl, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The room was bright and clinical and smelled like antiseptic and new life, and Maren looked at Marcus. This man she had met at a folding table in a high school gymnasium, this man who had asked, "What do you need?" before he asked anything else, and she saw his face do something she had never seen it do before. He crumbled. The composure, the easy warmth, the steady patience, all of it fell away, and what was left was a man crying openly with a newborn against his chest, making no effort to stop. And it was the most unguarded thing Maren had ever witnessed another person do. Colleen arrived 40 minutes after the delivery. She had been at the house when Maren called at 3 in the morning, and she had driven to Memorial Hospital in what Maren suspected was record time for a woman who obeyed every speed limit as a matter of personal principle. She walked into the room in her post office polo shirt because she had not bothered to change, and she looked at the 2 babies, one in Maren's arms and one in Marcus's, and she pressed both hands to her mouth and began to cry. It was the second time Maren had seen her mother cry. The first had been at the kitchen table in Vidalia when she told Maren about the miscarriages. This time the tears were different. These were the tears of a woman who had been told at 23 and 25 and 27 that her body could not carry a child, and who had carried one anyway, and who was now watching that child hold 2 children of her own who were also supposed to be impossible. 2 generations of impossible, breathing and blinking and screaming in a hospital room in Savannah, Georgia. Colleen held the girl first. She sat in the chair beside the bed and cradled the baby with the steady, practiced arms of someone who had held exactly one infant in her life, Maren, and had apparently never forgotten how. She looked down at her granddaughter's face and said nothing for a very long time. Then she looked at Maren. "You did good, baby. 3 words. From Colleen Cole, who measured her language the way a jeweler measures gold. 3 words was an avalanche. "I had a good example," Maren said. Colleen looked away. She pressed her lips together. She rocked the baby and said nothing more, because saying more was not something Colleen did, and Maren did not need more. She had enough. A card arrived at the hospital 2 days later. Small, white, no return address, but Maren recognized the handwriting immediately because she had seen it on 5 years of birthday cards and grocery lists, and the note he had left on the kitchen counter the morning of the proposal that said, "Check the park at noon." She opened it. Inside, in Derek's careful, slanted script, "Congratulations, Maren. They are lucky to have you, I mean that." She read it once. She folded it closed. She put it in the drawer of the bedside table beneath the hospital menu and a package of crackers, and she did not think about it again for a very long time. It was not cruelty that made her put it away. It was completion. The sentence between them had been written and finished, and she had no interest in rereading it. Derek Calloway had been a chapter, not the book. The chapter was over. The book was not. They brought the twins home to Gaston Street on a Wednesday afternoon in December. Marcus drove below the speed limit the entire way, both hands on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror at every stoplight as though the car seats might make a run for it. Colleen sat in the back between the babies. Dizzy was waiting at the front door when they arrived, having been fed by Sienna that morning, and the cat inspected each infant with her one good eye and then returned to her spot on the nursery radiator, apparently satisfied that these new arrivals were acceptable. The first weeks were a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleep that came in 90-minute fragments and coffee that was never hot long enough and laundry that multiplied overnight and the constant ambient hum of 2 tiny people who needed everything and could provide nothing except the astonishing, unreasonable fact of their existence. Marcus read his parenting books with colored sticky notes bristling from the pages. Colleen stayed through Christmas and cooked and cleaned and held babies at 3 in the morning so Maren could sleep, and never once said, "I told you so" about anything, which was its own form of love. Sienna came on weekends. She brought groceries and held whichever baby was crying louder and said things like, "This one has your stubbornness," about the girl, who screamed with a conviction that suggested she had opinions about the world and intended to voice all of them immediately. January came. Colleen went back to Vidalia, though she called every evening at 7, and the calls lasted exactly 4 minutes, because Colleen did not believe in long phone conversations and because 4 minutes was exactly how long it took her to confirm that both babies were alive, both adults were functioning, and the cat had not staged a coup. And then it was 4 in the morning. January, the house on Gaston Street was dark except for the kitchen light. The radiator ticked. Through the thin wall of the nursery, she could hear Marcus humming, low and tuneless, the sound she had heard every night for 6 weeks. The sound of a man who still did not know any lullabies but had discovered that if he kept the vibration steady, the baby would assume it was one. Maren sat at the kitchen table with her daughter against her chest and a mug of coffee going lukewarm in her free hand. The framed photograph of Colleen holding the twins at the hospital sat on the counter. Dizzy was asleep on top of the bookshelf, her one good eye closed, her tail hanging off the edge like a gray comma. It was quiet. The deep, specific quiet of a house at 4 in the morning, when the city is asleep and the only sounds are the ones that belong to you. The radiator, the humming, the baby's breathing, light and quick against Maren's collarbone. The coffee she would not finish, the night she would not sleep through. The life she had not planned, not imagined, not requested, not believed was possible until it happened. Less than a year ago, she had been a woman sitting in a doctor's office hearing the word unlikely. Less than a year ago, she had been a woman standing on a walkway watching the man she loved load his bag into a car. Less than a year ago, she had been a woman screaming into a jacket in a parking lot because someone had called her defective and she had believed, for one terrible afternoon, that the word might be true. She did not believe it now. She did not believe it because of the pregnancy or the twins or the man humming through the wall. She did not believe it because her body had proven the doctor wrong, though it had. She did not believe it because Derek had come back asking for another chance, though he had. She did not believe it because she had learned in the months between the porch and this kitchen table that the word had never been about her body at all. It had been about a woman's worth measured by a single function, and a woman's worth is not a single function. It is not a blood test or a follicle count or a yes or a no on an ultrasound screen. It is what she does when the floor drops out from under her. It is what she builds when the blueprint burns. It is the people she chooses and the ones she lets go, and the morning she wakes up in a house that smells like formula and coffee and knows, with a certainty that has nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with surviving, that she is enough, was always enough, will always be enough. She did not need Derek to come back. She needed to know she could keep going if he did not. And she could. She did. The baby shifted against her chest. Maren adjusted the bottle. Through the wall, Marcus's humming found something that almost resembled a melody, a few notes from Almost Blue drifting through the plaster, and Maren closed her eyes and listened. Outside the window, Savannah was dark and cold and still, and inside this kitchen, in this house, at this hour everything was warm. She finished the bottle. She held her daughter against her shoulder and patted her back gently and waited for the small, definitive sound that meant the feeding was done. It came. She stood carefully and carried the baby to the nursery, where Marcus had the boy already settled in the crib, both of them asleep, the man in the rocking chair with his head tipped back, and the baby in the crib with his fists curled, and Dizzy on the radiator and the walls painted the green of her mother's kitchen curtains. Maren set her daughter down beside her brother. The twins turned toward each other in their sleep, synchronized, 2 heartbeats that had kept time with each other since the day a doctor pressed a wand to Maren's stomach and said, "Well? Do you see that?" She stood over the crib for a long moment. Then she pulled the blanket over Marcus's shoulders because he would be cold by morning, and she walked back to the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the drain and made a fresh cup and stood at the window and watched the first gray light of January appear above the rooftops. A new day, her day, hers. Thank you so much for listening. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now, you will love it. See you in the next one.